Defining a projection in ArcCatalog. While working with projections in GIS can be one of the more difficult subjects that you'll encounter, I find that approaching this problem in a systematic way is a good way to help minimize any confusion. ArcCatalog is a valuable tool for not only managing our data in terms of exploring it, previewing the data, and so forth, but it's also a good tool to use to set up your projections. In this short video, I'll show you how to use the Define Projection tool from within ArcCatalog to set up a projection properly for your data layer. One of the first important things to remember about defining a projection is that most of the time when you obtain data from some provider, that data is going to exist in some type of projection already. In other words, it has already been established, in a way defined, by the provider. But it may not have been defined in a way that ArcGIS can basically, quote, understand what projection that data is in. In essence, by defining a projection with ArcCatalog, you are telling the program what projection to use for that data source. Now, another thing to keep in mind, and this can be very confusing, is that because the data already exists in some type of projection, you have to define that in that projection. In other words, you can't define the data in what do you want it to be projected in. That might involve another procedure, what we call reprojecting data. In this case, what we are doing is we are initially defining our existing projection for a data source. And again, that's already been established for you by the data provider. You just have to make sure that it has been defined in a way that the ArcGIS program can understand that projection. In a separate video, we'll take a look at some ways you might obtain information about what projection is being used for a given data layer. But this video will focus on and assume that you already know the projection and that you just need to define the projection for that layer. To get started, let's go ahead and open up our ArcCatalog program. And once the program is open, then we'll want to use the menu tree on the left-hand side to go to the folder where we have our actual data stored. And remember, we're doing all of this before we ever even pull it into ArcMap. This is the first thing that you want to do with the data once you download data from somebody. So we'll go into ArcCatalog, go into the working folder that we've set up, and to the folder for the projects, and you'll see here that I've got a DOQ folder, and I've got two providers here so that we'll have a couple examples. Let's first look at some data I downloaded from the Tennessee Spatial Data Server. I downloaded two quads, the Clinton quad and the Lovell quad. And when I look first at the Lovell quad, and what I want to do, see, I can preview that data if I want to, but what we want to go is go into the Metadata tab, and under Metadata you'll see a Spatial tab. Click that, and right at the very top you'll have information about the projection if it's been provided or defined, that is. And in this case we don't see anything here, which tells us that the data projection has not been defined. Now keep in mind, again, this is very easy to get confused, but keep in mind that the data, that doesn't mean the data is not projected. The data is very likely projected in some type of system, either by the provider or by the source where the provider got the data from. So basically that data does exist in a projection, but it's not been defined yet in a way that the ARC programs can use that information. So what we'll need to do is actually define the projection. And again, one more time, it's not in what we want it to be defined, which is very easy to do because you're working with data already in a lot of cases, and you're trying to set up a projection for it, and you're thinking of what you want it to be in. Again, this has to be defined in what it actually is stored in from the data provider. So we need that information before we can proceed. So how do we get that information? We'll talk more about how to find the projection in another video. In this case, we're going to assume that we've already obtained the information and that we know that this file should be defined in a projection of geographic with a datum of 1983. So the way we do that is we open our toolbox here at the top. And the first time you open the toolbox, it takes it a little while to open, so just be patient. Once the toolbox is open, you'll see a whole variety of tools we have to work with here. And the one that we want will be found under the Data Management Tools. So expand the little plus sign beside that set of tools. And we want to go into a suite of tools called Projections and Transformations. So we'll expand that one. And you'll see right at the bottom, Define Projection. So we'll click on that twice. And that opens up our Define Projection box. And we can drag and drop the file that we want to project into that area. And you'll see that the coordinate system is unknown. So we want to set a projection for that. And we've obtained that it was geographic, a datum of 1983. So we go to our select box, and we've got the choice between geographic and projected, and we're into geographic, and it's in North America, and we're looking for a datum of 1983. We'll scroll over, and you'll notice that there are several 1983 options in here. And for this class, most of the time, unless you're told differently, you always again want to pick the projection as just North American datum of 1983 without any other options such as the HARN or the CSR 98 and things like that. You just want the plain North America datum 1983. And we'll add that, apply it, say OK. It enters it into our Define Projection box and say OK. And you'll real quickly get a little Define Projection dialog that summarizes how fast it did that. And you can close that. And now we can also close our toolbox. And now recheck that file real quickly. Selecting it there, go to the Metadata tab, Spatial, and you'll see that we now have a projection defined. Now, here is another example from the file we got from the Tennessee Spatial Data Server for the Clinton Quad. And in this case, when we go to Metadata and Spatial, they have already defined it for us. So that saves us a step of having to do that. And both of those files came from the same provider in the same directory. And they actually exist beside each other. They're two quads here in the Oak Ridge area. So that just gives you an example of why you always want to check, because you never know. Data files that come from the same provider, some may be defined and some may not. So again, just to recap, before you ever pull these into ArcMap to try to use them, always define a projection in ArcCatalog first, if you need to. At least check in ArcCatalog if a projection needs to be defined. And that will wrap it up for this video.